Namaskar.
Namaskar. Yes, my name is Dr. Manohar. I live in Berlin. I became a Margi in 1972. At that time, I was a student in Göttingen. This is a place maybe 350 kilometers west of Berlin. And I was, as most of my fellows were also in a state of sufficient confusion. And I had already started doing transcendental meditation. But one day, a friend came around and he told me that there is a real yogi in town. And I must see him. He said I should see him. So I rushed to see him. It was Dada Karunananda. And he had a lasting impression on me. He was full of energy. He was charismatic. He was always in a high mood, laughing, charming, like that. So I was quite convinced that this is the right man. And I got initiated by Dada Karunananda. So this is sufficiently long ago.
And how long after that before you met Baba?
Oh, I met Baba 10 years later. That was when I first went to India in 1983, actually. And I went to Lake Gardens in Calcutta to see him. And I was wondering that my first experience with Baba was quite different than I had expected. I had expected him to be like a king, like a super king. But when I went there to Lake Gardens, I found him more like a grandfather. He was very familiar. He walked around in the courtyard of Lake Gardens with his house shoes, in simple dress, very simple, very, very smiling, very gentle, and not at all like a super king. I mean, the distance between him and me was far less than I had expected. And I was sufficiently relieved to see that he is a very gentle man, very gentle grandfather, very human, very open. So that was my first impression about Baba. Later I came several times to Tirjala. And I remember once Savatmananda was asking me when I came out of his room, isn't he like a king? And I said, no, he is not like a king. He is like my father, or my grandfather, better to say. So this was my impression of Baba from the beginning, and it is still going on like that. He is very close to me. It is a feeling of direct closeness, very private, very intimate, and very gentle.
Did you get to have PC with him?
No, I didn't. I was not after it. I don't know why. I didn't have that direct wish. But I had very personal experiences with him, which I will tell a little bit later. Actually, before seeing him personally, I saw him in my mind. And this is something which I would like to convey, especially because our next generation, they have no chance to see him physically. So what fun is it for them to tell big stories about seeing him personally if they cannot repeat it? But with the first story, I would like to convey the experience that it is even not necessary to see him physically. And this is like the follows. That same friend who had told me that I should come and see a real yogi instead of the people who initiated us into transcendental meditation before, that same fellow, he came some days later and brought me a picture of Baba. It is one of the famous pictures. But of course, at that time, I didn't know anything about Baba and any pictures and any legacy. I didn't know anything about all that. But he brought me this picture. And this picture, only this picture gave a tremendous momentum into my life. And this was not because the picture as such, but the picture veiled and unveiled to me from time to time. And this happened because of the reflections of light on the surface of the glass of that picture. The picture was behind a glass. And occasionally the light was reflected from that glass and I couldn't see the person. In the beginning, I didn't realize that how it was working. I was simply annoyed that I couldn't see him. And I turned the glass to see him. And when I saw him, I realized that he was smiling at me personally. And sometimes I looked at the same picture and he was not smiling at me personally. That was disappointing. And I thought what I might have done so that he's not smiling at me. I wanted that image of this person smiling at me. But sometimes he didn't. And sometimes even I didn't saw him because of these reflections. So this became a part of my daily life that I was looking at the picture, reconfirming whether he is smiling or not, rethinking what I did wrong and what I should improve so that I can make him smile. And sometimes when I didn't see him at all, and in the beginning I didn't know that it is just the angle of the picture in respect to the light source, it had a lasting effect. And so I recorrected my life in order to get his well wishes or his smile and his consent. And that went on for months. And in that period, my life changed dramatically only because of this effect. It changed to the positive side, very positively. And of course, I went to some retreats and I had more contact with Dada Karunananda. At that time, Dada Karunananda was traveling in Germany. Actually, he was traveling Europe, but mostly in Germany. And this place where I studied, it was just on the highway which was connecting the various places. That was Göttingen. So he came around frequently. And whenever he came, he stayed at my place because I had enough space there. So he stayed with his entourage and I got to know him more personally and frequently, which also had a very good influence on my psyche. So this is the beginning, how I developed that very personal contact with Baba. And that happened by trying to get the consent from this personality, which I actually didn't know. And it was all built on expectations, but it worked very nicely. That inner picture which was created in that way. For years, I didn't want it to be disturbed by having the confrontation with the actual person. But of course, I had to meet him, and that happened in 1983. Yeah, my strongest experience was about 8 years later, when I was in Anandanagar, and it was the New Year's DMS. And at that time, Baba gave talks every evening. So we were meeting in the big pandal, in the big, very large tent. And I was sitting not in the back, but rather near to his podium. But even at that time, I didn't know anything about what would have to be expected on that evening. I expected simply a talk which he would give as he did in the other evenings. But that was New Year's Eve. And at the end of his talk, it became very silent in the room. And then he prepared for Mudra. But I was a naive Maggie even at that time. Also, my medical studies had somehow distanced me from the general Magis, so they might have been informed about Varabaya Mudra, but I was not. I was completely naive. I was sitting there, and then I witnessed Baba giving his sloka, his mantra, and then opening his hands for the mudra. And being completely unexpected for that, I was completely completely surprised by what happened. Because instead of simply a man sitting, moving his hands, to me, a huge flush of white light crushed against me and threw me on my back. It was so surprising. Even today, I don't have a good explanation for that. But it clearly showed me the strength and the power of forces which are completely unknown to our Western science. This Western science, which I had studied for the years before, and I was a good student. I knew the ins and outs of that science at that time. Even before doing medical studies, I had done mathematics and physics. So I was, for that time, I was quite well informed. And I knew what I experienced there could not be explained by anything which I had learned in the universities of various cities in Germany. I had changed several times. I had been acquainted with sufficient numbers of professors, and none of them could explain or even had any idea of that which I experienced in that moment. And in a smaller form, I experienced the same later also. But when it happened the first time, it was the most astonishing and the most overwhelming experience, which simply pushed me on my back. I fell on the back. And that had a very lasting effect on my psyche, to consider things which are completely unknown to our Western science. Yeah.
Wow,
Actually,
that's
later,
amazing.
yes, it was amazing to me also, completely amazing. And in later years, actually, what I was telling, it was in 1988. And at that time, Baba had already started talking about something he called microvita. And when I listened to his talks, I didn't understand anything. He was talking, but after a few, maybe half a minute, I gave up to understand what he says because I couldn't. And I was just a kind of swimming in the melody and the rhythm of his voice.
Wow.
His voice was very, his voice was very unusual. Maybe people can't imagine this effect, but simply listening to the melody and rhythm.
Beyond words.
Beyond words, beyond words. One can feel it, but it is difficult and hardly impossible to describe it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, and
Divine sweetness.
but at that time I was not able to understand anything what he said. I was simply emulgated in the melody of his voice. But later his talks appeared in printed form, and then one could read it. But still for years, even reading it, I couldn't understand it. There were many words which were used in a way which were completely unfamiliar to me. Not to speak about the Sanskrit terms, which I didn't know, but even Western terms like endoplasm, for example, ectoplasm, they were used in a way which were contrary to what I had learned.
Understood.
Yeah, we had used ectoplasm and ectoplasm in an endoplasm and ectoplasm in a biological sense. And now he was using it in an esoteric sense. And that caused all the time confusion. And simple confusions occurred many times when I tried to understand his texts. Additionally, there were many Magis, not many, but enough, quite a number of Magis, who tried to understand also microvita as Baba had delivered it. Yes, and I was not satisfied with their explanations, but at the same time, I could not deliver a better explanation. But later, that was already in the end of the 90s, I had quite a number of discussions with Dada Vimalananda. And in these discussions, the concept became more clear to me. So that in 2003, that is 20 years ago now, I could formulate for the first time a concept of microvita which could satisfy my expectations and what I know from Western science. Actually, in conventional Western science, it was not possible, but there is the latest updates of Western science is more progressed than what we understand of science usually. And with the help of those most updated concepts, it was possible for me, not for everybody, but for me, it was possible to create a concept and a picture which unites the Eastern and the Western ideas of these supernatural and occult phenomena. Yeah.
And have you published anything since then?
I mean, with the help and cooperation of Dada Vimalananda, I published articles. In the beginning, it was simply articles. And in 2013, I published the first book, which didn't sell well. But this didn't matter. It was the foundation stone of all the other things which came later. But it was mostly a mathematical construct which didn't find any customers. So it is in the market, but on Google it ranks on number 3.8 million. So it is in the last rank of the books no, not Google, but in Amazon, it ranks on 3.8 million. So,
what's the name?
Oh, the name was from imaginary oxymora to real polarities and return. That was the name of the book. But of course, later we, also with the help of Vimalananda and others, we refined the whole thing to get closer to the customers, to the audience, and also to the Magis. And in 2017, the second book was published. That was the name was Microvita. Microvita, a new concept to reality. And now recently, the third book was published, and that name is Microvita Essays from 2017 to 2023. And in this last book, mathematics play almost no role, and it is more explanatory and, well, it is quite understandable with lots of pictures, and it discusses also philosophical and problems of modern arts, as well as psychology and sociology. So I think it is much closer to the needs of the audience, and more books will follow.
So you can get it from Amazon?
Yes, but right now it is available on Amazon.de, that is the German Amazon. And in order to save transportation costs, most people from non-European countries, they are waiting for the book to appear in Amazon.com. So that has to be organized. It is still in the making. But in Amazon.de, that is the German, it is available since a few days. One more story I should tell. It was on the occasion of my application for a new job as a senior physician in a hospital for naturopathy in Berlin. That hospital for naturopathy was affiliated to the university, and I thought it would be very promising to work there as a senior physician and as a vice director. And I thought it might open opportunities to look into the mechanisms of alternative therapies. So I applied for that post, as usual, as it is done usually. I had to go to the head of that department, and I was a little bit early at the place. So I waited outside in a type of small garden, and I had maybe 20, 30 minutes time, so I sat on a bench and meditated. When I finished my meditation, I stood up and started walking to that office where the director was supposed to sit. But as a surprise, I noticed that at the right side of my eye, a white person was walking with me. I was quite convinced that this can only be Baba, but it was impossible to look into his eyes because whenever I turned my head, he would stay on the right side, but he would not come in front of me. He stayed here on the right side. Of course, I was in a hurry to reach the place because my meditation had lasted a little bit longer than expected. So I couldn't engage myself long with this phenomena. But he stayed there. And then I had my attention on the task which was before me. So when I entered the room of that director, of course, the normal procedures went on. And in between talking, I noticed that he was still there at the right side of my person of me. And although I didn't see his face, but I felt that he was smiling. So this encouraged me to speak more lively and to speak more, maybe convincingly, to this director. And probably because of this, I got the job and became this person on that job, which was really good, and it engaged me for 5 years, and it was a good opportunity to see all the alternative methods of medicine.
Thank you very much, brother. Namaskar.
Namaskar.